From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And coming up today during our first half hour from the Kansas Farm Management Association at K-State, Kevin Herbel will talk about more financial indicators from the KFMA's recently released report on 2017 Kansas net farm income. They'll center on trends in farm operating debt management and on the profit differences among the primary crop enterprises in the state, with due consideration given there to the importance of USDA program payments. Today's Kansas Wheat Harvest Update will feature Extension Agricultural Agents Glenn Newdigger of Stafford County and Stacy Campbell of Ellis County. And further ahead with his weekly commentary on rural Kansas, K-State's Gus Vanderhoeven. Here on Agriculture Today. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Thanks for tuning in. You're listening once again to Agriculture Today. Just a little over a month ago, the Kansas Farm Management Association out of K-State unveiled its annual report on net farm income in the state of Kansas based on the records of the 2,000 KFMA members throughout the state. And we did cover the basic numbers at that time, but now we want to get a more detailed breakdown of what some of those numbers have to say. Along our way once again is the Executive Director of the KFMA, K-State's Kevin Herbel. Kevin, what we'll do here is take a look at the whole farm numbers again, if we might, and then we'll get into the crop enterprise comparisons that you have within this very large report, as it is every year. We go back to that general number on net farm income in the state for 2017, just shy of $63,000. There's more to the story than that single figure, though, obviously.
That is correct, Eric. There's a lot of information as we look at each of the farms behind that, and we're going to talk about some numbers here today that people can benchmark against, things that they can consider and measure themselves against, but always keeping in mind the importance for each of these farms to know the numbers on their operation and use their numbers for making management decisions.
One thing we want to illustrate right out, the share of that net farm income number that is made up of government payments. We didn't discuss that the previous time, but that in the current climate that be certainly needs to be addressed here.
Well, without a doubt, Eric, there is a influence of those government payments and the role that has in helping manage some of the risk and the place it has in those net farm income figures. If we look at the figures in 2017, our average net income was just under $63,000, as you indicated. The average government payments per farm were just under $27,700, which equates to about 44% of that net farm income figure. If we take that back 1 year and look at the 2016 figures, we were about $46,700 for our net farm income with $28,600 of government payments. So in the year before, it was about 61% of the net farm income. So certainly a role that those government payments are having in helping to manage the risk of this somewhat difficult economic time for a lot of farms. It certainly ranged as we look around the state all the way from in south central Kansas, where they had about a $30,000 net farm income. The government payments were a little over $37,000. So about 124% of their net farm income came from the government payments. And then the area of the state where the net income was the highest in southeast Kansas, it was about 18% of their net income came from those government payments.
What this says, Kevin, and it's obvious to anybody listening, that the government payment safety net is essential when the actual returns to outright crop production are not as great as they need to be.
Certainly a positive influence that it has in helping those farms to manage through this period of time.
Looking a little further here, and there were several producers and operations that racked up negative net farm income in 2017. Something that caught your eye very quickly was that a fair number of these have been on that track for multiple years.
Yes, Eric, as we look at those farms with a negative net farm income, having a negative net farm income in a given year is certainly a difficult thing for a given farm. There's need for outside income sources, a need to be able to manage within the whether it's the operating line of credit or whatever it is to bring in some dollars to that farm. In 2017, we did have 31% of the overall farms in our analysis summary with a negative net farm income. That number was 44% the year before in 2016. But it really becomes difficult for an operation where you begin to stack those negative years upon each other. And of that 31% of the farms, that was 320 of the farms in our data summary that had a negative net farm income. Of those 320 farms, 42% of them, it was their second year with a negative net farm income. For 28%, a little over a fourth of those farms, it was their third year in a row to have a negative net farm income.
What does that say as you analyze those numbers about the state of affairs for those producers? Once one gets into a financial rut of this type, it's hard to get back out?
Well, certainly it's difficult for even some of the decision-making becomes more difficult for each of those producers as they think about making each of the decisions they're facing. Typically, those farms will need to be looking at doing some sort of a debt restructure due to the fact of not being able to cover the operating expenses in each of those years. Depends in a lot of instances on what the level of that negative net farm income. Certainly as we look at the 2017 numbers with those 31%, about 21% of those were a 0 to 50,000 loss. A little over 10% were greater than a 50,000 loss. And so as you get a larger negative net farm income and then stack those up together, certainly enters more difficult management situation and a need to be addressing things in a more direct fashion in many cases.
Mm-hmm. Because working capital is the standard that needs to be monitored very closely here then.
Well, certainly within that, in the case of these farms, they, with the negative net farm income, are very clearly eroding away at their working capital and their equity. But due to the position we're in right now, where our margins are quite thin, and there's been areas around the state where we've had really good yields, and certainly good yields help to offset lower commodity prices. We've had a lot of, and we'll talk about this a little later when we look at the enterprise numbers, but a lot of good management decisions from a cost management standpoint that have been taking place. So those things all help. But even in the midst of all of that, a tightening of the level of our working capital due to the position we're in with the tighter margins is very much the case for many operations, if not most operations around the state.
And it might be worth mentioning that we did see a rise in interest rates that factors into this very subject.
Well, even since the first of the year here in 2018, we've seen the Federal Reserve increase interest rates 2 different times, roughly 0.25% each time, so about a 0.5% increase. If we look at the effective interest rate that KFMA farms are paying, and you've got a whole range of interest rates being paid on the borrowed dollars, all the way from some at a zero rate to a number of loans that are at fixed rates, and so a lot of variation there. But in the last 2 years, from 2015 to 2017, the average effective interest rate being paid by KFMA farms went up by about 0.5%. We've had essentially about a 0.5% increase by the Fed here during 2018 so far. Certainly on anything that's not a fixed interest rate, that will have some influence back to the interest that farms are paying. If we were to just take that 0.5% and say all else equal in 2018 compared to 2017, which certainly we know that won't be the case, but if all else was equal, that would equate to about a 5% decrease in net farm income just from that increase in interest rates alone.
Wow. It's interesting when you look at the executive summary of the overall report, one of the lead indicators year by year, the debt-to-asset ratio. By the numbers, that didn't seem to change much, which would seem to be favorable. Kevin, how do you interpret that?
Well, certainly looking at the debt-to-asset ratio for the KFMA farms. If we go from 2013 to 2017, so looking at the last 5 years, essentially we were at 23% in 2013. It improved a little to 22% in the in-between years, but we're at 23% as 2017 comes to an end. Within that, you would say, well, we're at that same equity position. Our overall financial position has not changed, and that's very much a benefit for the average farm, certainly at this point in time, for the agriculture industry, that we've been able to maintain a fairly strong overall financial position. Within that, part of what's allowed us to maintain that same debt-to-asset ratio is the fact that our asset values, primarily looking at land in this case, have come up during that period of time. They've settled back a little bit here in the last year, but those increased value of assets has helped us to take what's been a increase of $200,000 in average debt per farm during that 5-year period of time and keep us at that same debt-to-asset level. So overall, from a debt position, we've seen the farms increase overall debt by 44% in the last 5 years. The 5 years prior to that was 30%. 5 years before that was 34%. So we do continue to see increasing debt levels per farm as far as overall dollars of debt. And, as we indicated, the management of that improved by way of the debt-to-asset level.
And it does come back to knowing where you're at and really mining down to find out what is at the root of your successes or your struggles, Kevin.
That is very true. And I think for each farm operator, the manager of those farms, to be making sure they have good records, that they're able to get information out of, having others to come alongside them, whether that is a KFMA economist, if they're a KFMA member, whether that's their lender, to help assess your financial position, help kind of guide what needs to be considered in those decisions can be very important.
During the second part of our conversation with Kevin, we want to get into the enterprise analyses that are part of this overall KFMA report and to look at crop comparisons, which were returning well in 2017 and which not so well. Kevin Herbel is with us, the Executive Director of the Kansas Farm Management Association at K-State. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
We're back now on Agriculture Today, and across the way once more from the Kansas Farm Management Association at K-State is its Executive Director, Kevin Herbel. Today we are diving into the numbers a little bit deeper as far as the 2017 summary of net farm income in the state of Kansas as per the KFMA data for this past year. Let's break out the crops by comparison, the returns to our leading crops in Kansas as indicated by producer numbers. You have the 4 main crops that we talk about so much in Kansas: wheat, corn, soybeans, and sorghum. What do the numbers tell us about the more profitable of the 4 in 2017, Kevin?
Well, as we look at 2017, and one of the things we do as we put together our enterprise analysis is value the direct input costs. We assign a portion across the farm of the overhead or the fixed cost to each of those, and then we do also take the operator labor and assign a cost value to that operator labor as well to arrive at a net return to management per acre. In the case of those 4 primary crops, for 2017, all of those figures, after we accounted for all of those costs, including the operator labor costs, were negative. But the least negative, or the highest net return, was with grain sorghum, as the milo crop had an average per acre net return to management of an $8.60 loss. Next from that was the soybean return at minus $26.27. Corn was minus $34.91. And wheat net return to management per acre minus 37.47.
Now, does that include government payments or without?
In that case, that does include on the revenue side the government payments. So that's including sale of grain, any crop insurance income that would have happened to be there for farms where there was a yield or revenue loss, depending on the type of insurance that they had in place, as well as then the government payment income. Now, a lot of farms don't necessarily assess their profitability where they're valuing their labor. I think to look from an economic perspective, we really do need to do that. If we were to make an adjustment to those figures and say, well, let's take out the labor cost and see what our net return was to both the labor and management, in that case, 3 of those crops would move to a positive number. Grain sorghum would again be the highest of those with a positive $24.30 per acre. Soybeans next at $17.57, corn at $13.12, and then wheat is at a minus $2.37 at that point.
What gave grain sorghum the upper hand, albeit in total negative numbers across the board? But what was the difference maker for grain sorghum production?
As we look at the numbers, and certainly to get a good assessment of that, I think need to look at them a little bit over time and see some of the changes that have taken place. If we look at the total expense per acre on the grain sorghum production, the cost level in 2017 was the lowest that it's been in the last 10 years. So there was increasing costs relative to sorghum production through 2014. Since then, it has been coming down. But the total cost of production for grain sorghum production was the lowest that it had been in the last 10 years. Now, each of these crops did have some improved management of costs across the average farm during 2017. But by far, that cost management shows up the most relative to grain sorghum.
But you bring up something that's an interesting broad trend here, that the costs per acre have been declining steadily over the last several years.
It's declined steadily for the last several years for every one of those crops except for soybeans. Soybeans did decrease about $10 an acre in 2017 from what it had been in 2016. As far as looking at the last 10-year period, the cost per acre on soybeans was the highest in 16, had been fairly level from 13 to 16, but then did come down the $10 an acre in 2017 to about $3.42 an acre. Corn costs per acre were at $386 in 2017, which was the lowest that it had been since 2011, with steady decreases since 2014. And with wheat production at about $224 per acre was the lowest that it has been since 2008, so the lowest of the last 10 years essentially, and has been decreasing steadily from a high of about $270 per acre in 2012.
So what does this indicate to you when you look at those numbers? Is it as straightforward that producers are simply doing a better job of staying on top of their costs and of minimizing them where possible?
I think that's certainly a part of the equation that's taking place here. There's going to be multiple things taking place. I mean, certainly decreased fertilizer costs when you can pay less per ton for fertilizer. That's going to be a part of what's taking place. We've got impact certainly of some of the increased weed management concerns and some increased seed costs that are coming in, having an opposite effect, seeking to move things to the higher side. We have had in more recent years some decreasing fuel costs. One of the things that's been very evident in the last several years is decreased machinery and equipment costs, as we've had very clearly less purchasing of newer or used equipment on each of the farms in recent years that is certainly having an influence as those machinery and equipment costs are coming down.
Well, of course, the picture becomes clearer the closer you get to the numbers, and you look at the variations from farm to farm and when analyzing this report in total. Again, on the crop production side, what leaps off the page to you, Kevin?
Well, there's certainly several different things that will kind of jump out as we look at each of these different crops. The first thing I would say to that is something that even though I've seen it every year for many years, one of the things that continues to, I guess I'll use the word amaze me some, is just the extreme variability that there will be from one farm to the next as we look at the individual farms that are in the data that make up these data summaries. And so we'll certainly say again, we can present to them these numbers, present them as benchmark numbers and those type of things, and they can go to the Ag Manager website and see these figures. But the just utmost importance for each farm to be utilizing their own records, to have those records in an order that they can know and understand their own enterprise costs and be able to assess and make management decisions based on their financial position.
Right. And it is amazing, as you say, that you can have one farm compared to the other where the demographics of those operations are almost mirroring each other, yet these extraordinarily wide cost structures that these farms have.
Now, and certainly as we look crop to crop, we take the data and we do divide them into what we call profit thirds. Mm-hmm. So based on the net return, we divide the groups of farms in different thirds, and then we can compare high profit third to low profit third and what are some of the differences. Just kind of at a broad comparison, looking at those with corn, high profit to low profit third, roughly 20% of that difference was on the revenue side. About 80% of that difference was on the cost side. So very much importance pointed out there needed on the cost management side. We did look at the fact that there was overall a negative net return to management for the average farm, but here the high profit third did have a positive $41 per acre net return as we look at some of those farms out of there. So we present these average figures and say corn compared to beans, compared to milo, compared to wheat. But within there, some farms that were certainly showing positive net returns relative to each of those.
80% to 20% for corn. Is that gap similarly wide with other crops?
It does change as we look at the crops. With corn, it was the crop where expense was the most important. If we go to grain sorghum, it would be roughly 1/3 of the difference from revenue and 2/3 from the expense side. And looking again at grain sorghum, the net return to management for our high profit third was about $39 per acre. Soybeans and wheat were both right around half and half related to revenue and expense. So some influence there, certainly due to yield on the revenue side. That tended to be a major player as we look at the revenue side. A little bit of influence of the price received per bushel on the grain, but quite a bit of influence relative to yield in those cases. But still a very definite cost management advantage to the high profit third. With those two crops, soybeans would have had about a $44 net return to management for the high profit third. And on wheat, it was $11 positive net return to management. So we look at wheat production being very difficult, but there was a group of farms that in the midst of that were able to generate a positive net return per acre during 2017.
Well, loads of numbers here, but it keeps reverting back to that theme that you've shared a couple of times. Actually, we'll wrap up with it as well. Each individual producer needs to know their numbers and be familiar with where they stand as they benchmark against peers across the state of Kansas.
That is correct. Know your numbers, use your numbers. Having records and not using them to manage, pretty much the same as not having the records at all. Assess how you might be able to identify ways to know and understand your farm and make improved decisions.
And by all means, utilize the numbers from the KFMA report on 2017 net farm income, and those can be accessed directly on the Ag Manager website. Appreciate the time here, Kevin, as always. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
He's the Executive Director of the Kansas Farm Management Association at K-State. Kevin Herbel with us on Agriculture Today. We'll be back with more after these moments away. This is the K-State Radio Network.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Next up for you on Agriculture Today, today's Kansas Wheat Harvest Update. We'll hear from a couple of Extension agricultural agents this go-round, starting with the agent in Stafford County toward the south-central part of the state, Glenn Newdigger. So, Glenn, did your producers get off to a rather rapid start on their cutting before the rains rolled in?
Yes, we really did. Once they got in the field and it was ready, they just were moving through quickly. The weather was great, conditions, it wasn't too hot, machines were working good. Then we ran into the rain this week and pretty well shut things down for several days.
So how far along is harvest to this point then?
Most of the custom cutters have started pulling out, and it's just kind of the local guys cutting their own wheat that are left. Talked to a couple elevators yesterday. And if we can get back in the field tomorrow, which I think probably will, the south part of the county will probably be done by the end of the week. You get up to the north part of the county, you're probably looking at another 5-6 days.
So it's not too far from the end on the harvest there. So what's been the general assessment of your harvest results to date, Glenn? About where your growers thought they would be, or on either side of that, what?
Well, I think it's probably above expectations from what we thought earlier, because our weather conditions going into fall and then through the winter was really dry. Wheat looked thin, wasn't doing much, and we caught a couple rains. Things really come around. So I think it's still maybe not as great as we'd like, but it's definitely better than what we expected in probably February and March. Talking in the south part of the county, they're seeing some, anywhere from 25 to 50 with probably in that 40 bushel range, which is about average. Get up north part of the county, they missed a few rains that we caught down south, and looking in that 20 to 30 range probably. Test weights have been holding up really well. South part of the county, we're above 60 in most places up until the rains hit. Hasn't been any wheat taken in since then, so don't know what's going to do there for sure. North part of the county, maybe a little lower in that 59, 60 range, but still pretty good. Protein levels have been doing really well this year, 12, 14, so we're compared to last year, we're looking really good there on quality.
So this has really shaped up to be pretty decent. Like you said, going into the latter part of spring and early part of summer, maybe it was an iffy proposition on this wheat crop, but better than that, it sounds.
Right. Early on, a lot of people were trying to make that decision on, do we put the fertilizer on?
Right.
Is it going to be worth the crop? And those that did, I think, are really benefiting from it. We also didn't have a lot of weed disease pressure this year from any of the rust. We were so dry that we just didn't have that stuff moving up. And plus, Oklahoma and Texas, I think their wheat crop was poor enough. It just didn't come up this way. Weeds are really starting to come on now. If it continues to rain and people can't get in the field, weeds may become an issue, but the weeds really are starting to pop through on this wheat ground.
And with that, is that complicated by the fact that around many parts of the state we've heard of the short-statured wheat? Is that an issue as well in Stafford County?
I think probably is. The wheat's shorter this year because of the dry conditions, but it's also thinner. It didn't tiller as much, and so there just wasn't much shading there as what we would normally have in a normal year. So I think the weeds have really just kind of come on, and then we got the moisture, and they've just really, really popped and taken off.
Glenn, thanks for the briefing on harvest progress in Stafford County. Appreciate it as always.
Well, you're welcome.
He's Glenn Newdigger, Extension Agricultural Agent in Stafford County, based there in St. John. And following up now with the latest from Ellis County, which is part of the Cottonwood Extension District, the Hayes area. Along with us once again is the longtime agricultural agent there, Stacy Campbell. Well, Stacy, once more we've been talking about the recent rainfall, putting a hold on harvest. Up to the rains, though, how far along were your producers?
Around 30%. It's kind of funny, Eric. I've gotten anywhere from, on one end of the county, 15% of it's harvested, and on the other east side of the county, 60%. So quite a variation, but after kind of visiting with several people, I kind of settled on somewhere around that 30, maybe 35% is harvested in the county, give or take a little.
Is that uneven ripening or moisture delays or a combination of the above?
I think it's a combination of the above. There's definitely still, or last week there was definitely still some green wheat out there, and then, rains in different areas and so forth. Mm-hmm.
So the producers that have put a dent in their harvesting and have some bushels to report, what yields, what test weights are they sharing with you?
Okay, yields have been anywhere from 15 to 75 bushels. I'm going to say that 35, maybe 40 bushel wheat will probably peg quite a bit of the wheat in the county. You know, there's been some bright spots, of course, where there's some good summer fallow wheat where they've caught a few more rains, where I've heard, guys saying anywhere from 40 to 60. And like I say, I guess there's been that one field that I was told by an individual with the co-op that hit 75 bushel, but probably quite a bit of, 20 to 35 or 40 bushel wheat for Ellis County this year. Test weights before the rains were 60 plus, probably averaging around that 60 and a half to 61 or so. Of course, with the rains we've had now, we're all expecting those test weights to be lower, and how low, we'll just have to wait and see.
Have you seen any change in the protein levels this year compared to what you would normally experience?
Yeah, definitely the protein was higher this year. I'm hearing there again, but before the rainfall, high 12s to low 13s on the protein.
Not bad. Not
bad. Yeah, pretty good. Anything, I believe, over 12, the elevators are pretty tickled with.
Right. Has this crop gone beyond what you and your producers had thought it might produce this year? Because there was so much pessimism in a lot of western Kansas, for sure, as to how well these stands would do given the dryness throughout the better part of the growing season and other adversities.
Good question. I mean, since we're not, but maybe a third of the way along, kind of hard to peg that for sure, but I think there has been some bright spots, like I say, some 40 to 60 bushel yields. So I guess I would say kind of a mixed bag there. Yeah, I think there's going to be some surprises, and then I think there will be guys that'll be, thinking, that's kind of about what I thought it was going to do.
And so it's going to be several days, it appears, before your producers can get back at it full bore to knock out more of your harvest. Yeah,
kind of thinking, maybe there might be a little bit of wheat possibly cut here Thursday, and if it doesn't rain anymore, for sure, probably guys can get back in the field Friday, Saturday.
Stacy, thanks for the quick comments. We appreciate them.
Yep, thank you.
Stacy Campbell, Extension Agricultural Agent for the Cottonwood Extension District. That's comprised of Ellis and Barton counties. And that is today's Wheat Harvest Update for you here on Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen. This is our state, Kansas.
We're short on hay this year.
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
A week ago I received a phone call which was left on my answering machine. When I returned the call, I was talking to an older woman asking for help with a landscape design need for an historic home. The Kusterhouse Museum in Marysville. We talked and I listened, but I quickly realized that as with all these projects, I needed to see it and sit eye to eye with the caller to learn more. I promised I would drive down and visit. I stressed that no promises were made as far as providing help. However, I did sense from our phone conversation that professional help was needed. In the past, I've eaten at the Kusterhouse restaurant. It's the brick home built on the block just south of the white clapboard Custer house, with the two shiny lions near the gate. It was when my brother-in-law and his wife visited us many years ago, and we decided to enjoy the old atmosphere in the well-known restaurant. Parking was no problem, and the atmosphere and meal were very good. All was cared for. They used silverware and real linens. They are very good memories, and I emailed my brother-in-law that I was going there this past Monday. I reminded him how surprised he had been and amazed that while we had looked at the town, a train had come through, crossing Main Street, hooting and blasting all the way. It was a very long train, slowly rumbling by and shaking the houses and brick underneath. This past Monday I drove down. I left plenty early so I could enjoy the 1-hour drive. Rain clouds hung overhead, and every now and then a downpour made me switch on the wipers. It's amazing how needed rain, cheers up the countryside. Wheat fields had been harvested, and hay bales were rolled up. I noticed that hay had been cut in all odd corners and along the road. We're short on hay this year, so we look for it wherever we can turn a tractor and a swather, to be followed by rake and baler. I passed familiar turnoffs, Elk Cove Spring, a stop on the Oregon Trail, and as I drove by I thought about all the people who had traveled that trail, moving west, plodding along, depending how they traveled. People were tough, desperate, also filled with hope and dreams. Just imagine moving your family. It's our history, or rather, your history, although I too moved west, but only as far as Manhattan. And I moved with my family using the large U-Haul truck, loaded with our belongings, including the old buckets with bent and rusted nails. Oh yes, they came along. That's sentimental. Behind the groaning truck was the converted trailer made into a pony trailer for Star, the pony, who traveled west with us, as did the dog, which sat next to me in the truck. Good company, as the family followed in the car. And that is a long time ago. But that is why when I received the phone call regarding garden design help and a plan for the Custer House Gardens, I said I would come up, and we would talk, and I would listen. When I arrived, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. I parked in front of the house after circling the block twice to get a good feel for the situation of the block. What had been a restaurant seemed to have changed hands, although I learned the city owns the whole block, or whichever historic organization. As I walked the porch, I slowly moved to the back of the property, amazed by the old adjacent structures making up the whole complex. As I walked and observed, I sensed the need. Turning around, I stepped into what once was the ice house and greeted the two people sitting at the table with chairs arranged. They were waiting for me. As I sat down, the rain had picked up again, but we were dry. While I did not know the two, and later a third, we quickly started to know each other because of the interest in the Custer House and its history. As we talked, I learned that they had received help from what I can see a very capable and dedicated person, Nancy Lewis Smith. From what I have been able to read so far, I'm impressed with the information she pulled together. Sadly, she died several years ago, and before the project was finished. The garden restoration work slowed down, might even have stopped, except for maintenance work. When I left, I reiterate that I made no promises. I left with an armful of brochures and file folders. I'm slowly reading and digesting. But I can say this. Any town which has a structure or structures like this with such a rich history of people and time better have the powers to be who totally step up to the plate and support the effort often made by a few far forward-looking people who try to save what is and hope to restore. They don't do it for themselves. It is their community they treasure and love. Marysville holds history. Think Pony Express. The trick is to do things right and not make any mistakes. I know what they need. I only wish I was younger. I'm reading and I'm thinking. Charles Custer, born in Germany, came to the United States in 1852, after they lost their home in the War of 1848. Over the years, they moved west and finally settled in Marysville and helped build a Kansas town.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on rural Kansas. Thanks for listening in. Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.